Hey, got something that reminds me of you. Looks just like you. Look at that. Just kidding. You look nothing like this, but you do have a cute nose. You have a cute nose. I'll give you that. Engineers, what's the most ridiculous idiot proofing you've had to add in your never ending quest to combat stupid people? Someone sued the bakery I used to work at because, quote, there was no sign stating you had to take the toothpick out of the sample before you ate it. I wish I were joking, but I was the employee who offered the sample tray to her and watched her do it. We couldn't offer samples for a long time, and when we got the green light to do it again, we were told no toothpicks. We just stopped doing samples unless corporate was in town because the whole reason we put toothpicks in the samples was because people would literally sift through the samples on the tray looking for the biggest piece, and we'd have to keep tossing them out due to contamination. Story 2. We had a pedestrian bridge next to a bridge for vehicles, separated by about a 3 foot gap. The bridges were about 20 feet high over the water. So many drunk pedestrians climbed over the rails and tried to jump between the bridges and didn't make it that I was directed to design a safety net to hang between the two bridges. Story 3. I work on cars, so almost everything is designed around protecting people. My favorite is that we have to make the HVAC system louder and engine noise insulation worse because people will complain if they can't hear the systems running. We can make almost silent air ducts, but our warranty spend would go up. Story 4. My mother has OCD. She got a new Kia Sorento a few years back and loved it for how quiet it was. Until the squeaks started. I'd be driving with her and she'd say, Dad, can't you hear it? It's driving me nuts. I had no idea what she was on about. She took it to the dealership and demanded they fix it. They had no idea what she was talking about. She had a mechanic sit in her car while she drove it and he couldn't hear a thing. He sat in the driver's side and drove it and actually could hear it then, but said it's just a normal noise the car makes. She went nuts. She's taken the car in to see multiple mechanics now, driven it out of town to see other dealerships, even tried to take it apart herself, all because the car was too quiet. So I feel like if you're doing all this and the lack of
Hello.
noise really bothers you that much, maybe it's time to
Hello
get like an
there.
older,
Can't really
noisier
read
vehicle.
my
Just
chat.
saying, you can have what you want. Story 5. I'm a merch intern. I walked in on my manager discussing a design with another engineer. All I heard was, so the guys will probably use that as a hammer, so I made it out of this stronger material. When they're working, they'll probably be throwing the small door open, so I used stronger hinges and added a stop. It's things like this that I really appreciate about my internship. I likely wouldn't have thought about that myself. Story 6. I worked in a call center and all the PCs were slung on straps under the desks. I'd love to know which genius came up with that idea. So people would be on the phone swinging back and forth in their chair and hit the power button. Then I'd get a ticket saying, my modem keeps turning off. I disabled the power button from
So
immediately
I'm
shutting down the
making a
PC if you
box.
pressed it, but of course
I'll
they'd
show
get
you.
into a position sometimes where it'd be held down long enough to override it. Solution? Duct tape and a bottle cap. Once we upgraded all the PCs to new ones, I took the time to remove those stupid
I'm
straps
make.
and put the PCs behind the
I'm
monitor out of reach
making
instead. Story
these
7. I
ones.
was once
This has to be
introduced to the
glued a
difference
little bit
between an
better.
administrative solution and an
Again, it
engineering solution.
spins.
The example given was a railroad crossing. Oddly, having wooden gates come down to block the road for an approaching train is an
That's what I'm
administrative
doing.
solution, since people will drive around them. The engineering solution is to have an elevated crossing so automobile traffic cannot encounter the rails. Edit. I'm going to blame
I'm
the
listening
guys
to
from the
story time.
VLE who have the presentation. We were getting training because the department decided to adopt the practice
Yeah,
for
I'm
having tiger
watching or
teams from other
listening
labs.
to
I was
a
at Los
channel that's
Alamos
called
National Laboratory at the time.
Undersparked.
Circulate to do safety inspections. The administrative slash engineering thing was one of two things that stuck in my memory all these years. And now I learned that it's wrong.
Thank you,
My life was
thank
a
you, thank
lie.
you.
Story 8. I have one
Well,
customer that takes our
sometimes it
product,
goes,
removes the
sometimes
battery
it
packs, and
doesn't.
solders them in
Right.
backwards. He cuts
And I
the wires to the
decorated it, of
batteries, then
course.
solders
And
red
it
to black and
opens,
black
so
to red,
it's
then
miniature
calls us
jewelry
complaining that
in
they don't work. There's no
in
idiot
it.
proofing that I can think of at this point. I pretty much just admit defeat
See
now.
if we can
Edit.
make
Wow,
another
this
more
got big overnight.
complicated
I'll
one
answer a
that
few questions here. We can't pot them. They have
that
replaceable
turns
AA
and
batteries in them. They're off warranty.
unfolds
Every time
boxes
they come
that's
back in, we
inside of
build them.
it. We'll
They
see
don't
if I
seem
can
to
do it.
mind, and I'm so used to this guy's shenanigans, they don't take long to fix.
But
That
yeah, it
first one,
takes
though,
time. I spent
it took me
almost a week
forever
to
to
make
figure
that
out
one.
that the power lines were reversed. It
We're
just never
listening to
occurred to me.
story
It's
time,
just
so
not
we're
something
having
you'd
fun at the
expect. I
same
sent him an
time.
email after half a dozen or so of these came in backwards.
I'll turn
Explained
this
how
sound
red
a
goes
little
to
bit
red,
down. It
black to
might be a
black,
bit
with pictures.
disturbing.
Only had one come in backwards
Yeah,
after
take
that.
some.
I've always
I
wondered what
drilled
would
the
happen if
hole.
this guy ever needed to jump his car. I've designed Rev 2 of the product, with this guy specifically in mind. They use a USB-C
Yeah, I
charging
don't have
port and
fancy
a
tools.
Li-ion battery. No need
Just
to open it up and swap out like
plain
batteries now. We'll see how
old-fashioned
he responds to
non-electric
that. Big
tools.
question. Why? I have absolutely no idea what this dude is trying to accomplish. Your guess is as good as
And
mine.
because of
Story
it,
9.
sometimes things
Application
break.
engineer here. When handling a 3D laser scanner, it has to be placed and fixed on a stable tripod. A flat rail of a balcony is not a suitable substitute for it. And no, the insurance has not covered the total loss of the device after it fell from the fifth floor to
Do you
the
hear the
concrete
story
pavement.
time or
Story
no?
10. Industrial engineer
Should I
here.
turn
You
up
have
or
no
down?
idea how many pointers I've had to add to the
Thank you
product
so
I've made.
much.
Example, I had to
Yeah, I
add
showed it, didn't
arrows
I?
to a product that had two
This
pieces
one.
and the
I'm
client
making
could
more.
put together and remove for cleanup.
And
It was
this
designed
miniature
so
I
that
made,
you could
so you
only
can
fit
see a
into
little
one
bit here.
position, and it was made very obvious which position that was. Think a larger shape in a hole. No, I still had to put two arrows in case people couldn't tell the bigger bum could only fit in the bigger gap. Story 11. I work for the utility company, mainly in the distribution of natural gas. All of the pipelines we put into the ground are either yellow or black and yellow, and only gas is allowed to use yellow for their
It's
pipes.
exit
Some
time.
of them have
It's time.
natural
Oh,
gas printed on them in big bold letters. We put special tape about 20 centimeters above the pipeline to indicate that there's a gas pipeline below, and whomever is digging there should be careful. All these
hands
precautions and
gets
warnings,
tired
and
after
we
a
still
while.
get daily incidents from idiots who are digging somewhere and hit a gas pipeline. Story 12. Reminds me of one of my first design jobs. Okay, boss, I've got the design. The front footing needs to be 20 inches wide. The rear footing is 17 inches wide. So both of them are 20 inches. Well, why do we need a 20 inch if a 17 inch will work? Because that way we don't have to worry about the construction guys building a 17-inch front footing and a 20-inch rear footing. Story 13. This is a very common one in construction. You can design the perfect structure, every element fine-tuned to the nth degree and the most efficient structure possible. The problem is that this means every element is a different spec. It needs to be ordered separately. None of the elements align perfectly because they're all
Is
differently
it
sized.
was? Is
The
it
contractor
hard?
spent
Well,
twice as
yeah,
long
and I
sorting
can't
everything out on
press
site and ensuring
too
the correct
hard
parts
because
are
it
used in the
will
correct
break.
place and get it
It
wrong anyway. All
cracks.
the way back to the
And
fact
I
that
made
you
it
spent
from
twice as much time designing
this.
everything as you
So
needed
it's
to.
just the
Or
stick
you can figure out the worst case
and
elements,
this.
design for that worst case, and spec everything else the same. If it works for the worst case, by default, it also works for everything
It's
less onerous.
repetitive, I
Sir,
would
you
say.
spend a little more on raw materials, but you have more than enough money everywhere else to more than pay that back. In reality, find a nice happy medium with a few practical sizes. So having both a 20 and 17 footing
You see how
may
long
have
time it
been
takes to
technically
drill just
correct,
a
but
small
it
hole.
also meant more organization and planning was needed. More chance of screwing up and needing a second digger bucket to dig the trenches. Story 14. I work remodeling small businesses. Our niche is we keep the business
There we
running while
go,
doing the
another
remodel.
hole.
I've caught people
Woohoo!
climbing over fences, ducking under moving heavy machinery,
I
broke
did
into
all these
locked doors,
already.
all to act surprised when we tell them this area is off limits and point to one of the 10 signs we posted. Yeah,
This is
why would you do
crooked, I
this?
can't
What do
use
you stand
it.
to gain outside of maybe like a cool TikTok reel that'll get you some clicks and likes, but you might potentially die? What are you doing? Story 15. Mechanical engineer. I work on systems that need to be light and durable, but the business guys want it cheap. This is a choose two sort of situation, so you can probably guess what got dropped. I can't tell you how many times I've told the operators to not intentionally drop the product from 6+ feet onto concrete. Can't get specific since it's a very niche slash classified market. Story 16. An app which scans barcodes to recognize items. It runs on Android and uses the device's camera to handle the scanning bit. The number of times the question is asked, is this supported on secure cameraless devices? Or
I
our
failed on
devices
that
don't
one.
have cameras and they don't have a barcode scanner. Can the app still work? Story 17. Years ago, I worked as a building engineer, glorified maintenance man, for an office building that had endless complaints about the AC slash heater not working. The staff in the office would adjust the thermostat up and down all day, and then everyone else would complain it was too hot or too cold. It did not matter what kind of lock or cage I put on it. They would break and remove within a day or two of a new one being installed. So I got a new thermostat with a remote sensor and installed it in my office with a remote sensor near where the old T-stat was. And I left the old T-stat in place with low voltage power so that it would appear to function. Then I let them change the temp on the old T-stat all they wanted, while I programmed the real one in my office to our building standards. Poof. Just like that, the complaints were reduced by 90%. I've often wondered how much of a placebo effect those visual thermostats are. Like, if you see that it's 70 degrees internal temperature, does that, like, subconsciously trick your body into thinking that it's warmer or cooler than it actually is? Apparently, that is the case. Story 18. Engineering coworker always told the story of when he used to work support at one of the leading electronic lab equipment, like oscilloscopes, companies. Engineers would call or email when a piece of hardware stopped working, and the initial support advice was to ask the engineer to, quote, check the polarity on the power cable, just in case it was, plugged in incorrectly. Story 19. I'm in the process of turning my woodcrafting hobby into a career, with every project I add to my portfolio. I've seen a lot of requests for desks that are so customized. They want everything that can't
There we
happen.
go. I
They
thought
want
it
an
had
armrest
broken.
where there's also a cup holder.
They
They
went
want a
fine.
keyboard at this height while having a monitor at that height. All these impossible requests.
Some
I
of
eventually
them,
sat down and
when
thought
I
to
cut
myself,
them,
if
got
I
a
was
little bit
super lazy
crooked,
and
but
didn't
that's
want to move
okay.
them from one spot, what would make for the perfect office desk? So I made one. Got $150 from it. Story 20. This was while I was in school for electrical engineering. The prof looked at us one day and said, you can't make something 100% idiot proof because the universe will just make a better idiot at the challenge. That has stuck with me since. Story 21. Structural engineering at an industrial facility. Switched to pipe or HSS for bracing because anything made out of angle would be immediately torched out of the way if it ever got remotely close to anything maintenance wanted to work on, since it, quote, was just an angle iron. Story 22. Not my site, but a coworker's who gave us updates at our weekly oversight coordination meeting. Back in the summer of 2016, his construction site had about a 60-foot pit on site, which was being excavated safely per all industry regs. However, it did not have 24H lighting, and there was
Can't
minimal
put
fencing
too
around
much
the area.
pressure
This
on
was
it
fine
because it's
because
going
they
to
were
crack.
only excavating during the day, and access to upper edge was blocked off and
But
controlled,
I
and
want to
the
get
whole
it
site
done
was
right,
properly
so
controlled and
yeah,
fenced off. All
next
obligatory
time.
safety measures necessary were in play, and the laydown area was controlled. You know what else happened in the summer of 2016? Pokemon Go came out. There were 3 Pokestops on the site. He had to hire round-the-clock security so people wouldn't sneak onto the site in the middle of the night and die. Then it turns out people got clever, and you had groups where like 4 people would run diversion for security while they gave all their phones to another person who would sneak onto the site in the middle of the night and run everyone's phone. So they had to hire more security to prevent this diversion tactic from working. Luckily, as everyone remembers, most people lost interest after a month and they stopped coming. When you're doing a risk plan, you think about schedule and budget. You don't think, what's my risk mitigation strategy for a breakout mobile game enticing idiots to accidentally dump their corpse on my worksite? And how much money should I set aside to manage it? Story 23. A sound engineer
My
asked me
wrists
to
are
assist
getting
him with the
tired.
funeral home's need for variable music levels to subdue loud talking in the parlor. It may seem counterintuitive, but with sensors installed, as
There we
talking grew
go.
louder in the viewing room, the computer
Let's put it
adjusted music
together.
became softer. Likewise, when the room for the wake was hushed, the music became somewhat louder. The director said that, quote, most people lacked common sense, good manners, and didn't know how to behave by moderating their talking levels before an open coffin. The net effect of the music's variable volume helped maintain an overall peaceful atmosphere, conducive to those coming to the parlor to pay their last respects, according to the director's request. Story 24. Not too exciting, but most of the real stupid proofing ends up in labeling, namely the IFU/DFU user manual. The real ridiculousness happens in the failure mode effects analysis, FMEA, meetings. This is where you have to imagine every thinkable possible misuse, no matter how outlandish, and assign an occurrence score and severity score, then mitigate, often on the IFU. These meetings bring out an infuriatingly creative side from your QA people, who are otherwise the most uncreative people in the office. Story 25. I worked on an old mainframe system that we'd so sufficiently idiot-proofed that the workers started just saying, if I'll let you do it, it must be okay, instead of understanding their processes. When we replaced that system, we found all sorts of things they'd been doing against policy, because no one knew it was against policy, and so no one told us to write a new catch to stop them from doing it. Then, after we replaced the system, we basically had to replace everyone because they kept just doing whatever the new system would allow. Except the new system had none of those checks. So we had a few months where literally nothing was in line with policy. We had to try to explain to them that it was literally their jobs to know what the policy was and enforce it. Story 26. Way back when, I designed a product that had an optional battery module that was meant to connect to a main module. To assemble the battery module to the main module, you had to put the round peg in the round hole and the square peg in the square hole. That's it. I even put an effing sticker with instructions on the back of the battery module. Even so, we still had around 1% of clients that couldn't figure out this puzzle. One particular client had used a hammer to force the module together the wrong way, and another had tried to solder wires through the holes and pegs, and another didn't understand that he had to connect the battery module to the main module for the former to power the latter. You can't engineer around stupid. There's no worst case. It goes all the way down past zero to minus infinity. Story 27. Aero engineer here. Someone on our team, everyone hyped up, was the most unqualified person I've ever met. 8 years experience, and they openly admitted they cheated, not just on their exams, but also on their MASC thesis. Anyways, this person didn't even know the basic equations for aerodynamics and aircraft performance, and couldn't code despite seeing the same code for years, and still couldn't use in-house tools that myself and two other new people learned about in 3 months on the job. This person also openly stole my presentations and work to show up in group meetings. Even forgot to swap my name at the end of the slide once. We got so tired of doing their work and spoon feeding them stuff, and managers turning a blind eye to them and telling them stuff they should have known, that we actually ended up coding in error message prompts to clue them in when they got to the same questions we answered millions of times. When that didn't click in, I actually coded in messages showing them which lines to go to find common issues. Guess what? 5 years of MATLAB and Fort Wayne, they
Box.
still couldn't use a debugger. I
Just a
actually got
dry.
personally so annoyed that
I'm
I
gonna
had
adjust
certain
it.
error catches go to their printer and email to clue them in. I could go on for ages, but this was hands down the worst engineer I'll probably ever meet. The only thing this person was good at was sucking up to the right people and getting away with the most blatant disqualifications I'll ever see. They're doing their PhD now. So at some point, people like this will eventually get exposed, so I wouldn't even worry about it. Just, focus on you and enhancing your career, and they will get their comeuppance. Story 28. Software engineer, sort of, made parts of a website to let the customer decide where they would like holes in our product. Did not realize customers would fill a hole with a diameter of 0 every 0 millimeters. So no hole was made, and the air supply it was supposed to give did not work very well. Now, they can no longer pick 0. It has to be more. And added an extra button in case someone actually did not need holes. Story 29. Software engineer. The number of times I've had to explain that backwards compatibility can't exist for a new feature is astounding. Usually this has come in the form of new hardware is getting released and new hardware is written to support said hardware. Customers complain that old software, written before new hardware existed, doesn't behave well with the new hardware and make a stink about needing to upgrade the software, or being having to update clients as well as servers, or some other ridiculous thing. Story 30. Mechanical engineer working in HVAC, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. Here, I have a contractor firm that always loses the mechanical plans when we send them out. To mitigate this, I send the plans over to the primary and his boss, as well as upload them to an online cloud where they keep their plans for the projects. I have started to CC their secretary as well and label the folders plans in here. I still get weekly panic calls from them saying they can't find the plans for different projects, and I just facepalm every time. Story 31. Software engineer here. In the organization which I previously used to work, their business model was based on supply chain. It was very hard to explain technical limitations to non-technical product managers, mostly of operations side. I sometimes used to explain them by relating to everyday things like explaining server or any resource as a pot or something which has a limited capacity and you cannot fill more water slash serve more requests than that. It's kind of fun. I remember once I explained them horizontal and vertical scaling by taking example of train and bus. You can attach more coaches to train to handle more requests. That's horizontal scaling, whereas you need to hire a large bus to accommodate more people than vertical. Story 32. The stupid proofing I've had to do for engineers in my company is probably only combated by the same they've had to do for me, I bet. Now, when I train people, I say, when you make guides, assume you're talking to a person who doesn't even know the most basic things. Don't write execute command, blah, blah. Take a screenshot, circle the bar, and write type in XYZ and click enter, and so on. Same thing goes for physical things. Surely they'd shut the valve off before. No, they wouldn't do F all if it's not written explicitly in the manual, and maybe even then. On one hand, it's a bit annoying to make things stupid proof, but the way I think of it is, we all have brain freeze moments. The longer time it takes us to engineer a part or write a guide to make a process simpler is worth it if one distracted employee doesn't get hurt or make a mistake that could have been avoided. Story 33. Many years ago, I somehow became the owner of the software that was used to print out labels that would be applied to our 2-day radios, pagers, etc. There were 4 to 8 labels that would give FCC details on frequencies, details on the batteries, etc. But if the radio was going to Japan, a few of them were not to be applied. Operators were trained for this, but would too often make mistakes because there is a label with numbers and writing on it. Applying it was a quality defect, which was closely monitored. To fix it, an engineer asked me to not print the information for the Japan radios. That would produce a blank label, which should alert people not to apply it to the radio. A few months later, a quality defect appeared where someone had applied a blank label. The engineer called me back and asked if we can put "do not apply" on the labels instead of leaving it blank. I thought for a bit and said that some operator is going to apply the label that says "do not apply" anyway. Plus, we would have to print it in about 7 languages. He agreed and went off to figure out a different way to deal with it. Story 34. Electrical engineer in the building industry started putting wiring diagrams on the blueprints for how to wire emergency lighting battery packs because sometimes when I did an inspection, I would find lights that either never turned off or would go into emergency mode and drain the battery every time you turned off the lights because someone was too stupid to not read the simple instructions that came with the battery pack. Story 35. At one of my internships, I was called Bollard Man because I personally installed over 50 bollards around the plant within 3 months in response to people nearly destroying expensive things. I think some operators think it's a personal challenge to see what they can get to fit between bollards and park and hazard zones. For the outdoor areas, I started reading into defensive architecture designs to come up with protective designs that don't actually look like bollards. Methods like planting trees and bushes, adding drainage ditches, decorative boulders, picnic benches, street lamps, walls, and so on. The kicker being, I'm an electrical engineer. It's not even remotely in my job description, lol. I've just learned that there's just no amount of signage and warnings to convince people that even though you can't see the megawatts of power flowing through the equipment, they are in fact quite deadly if damaged or misused. Story 36. I used to work as a mechanical designer at an automation company. We built pallet dispensers for warehouses. They're a big metal box where a forklift will load 40 to 80 pallets into them as a double stack, and the machine spits them out 2 at a time at the bottom for all the picking trucks. The dispenser was lag bolted to the floor. Anyway, we get a warranty complaint. The mounting bolts are broken and it keeps moving. Huh? Turns out the warehouse guys weren't slowing down to get pallets from the machine, but ramming it and using it as a brake. It was at the end of a corridor, so they had a nice long run up. We had to turn the machine 90 degrees so they couldn't build up speed and double the number of lag bolts and up the size. Story 37. Architect here, designing a food cold storage facility which needed auto opening slash closing doors between negative 22 degrees Celsius storage chamber and loading bay. Doors are for forklift access. Forklifts are very good at destroying doors. Worked with fork truck manufacturer, considering max speed in a straight line. Design system of barriers at 90 degrees to doors to channel the trucks to the doors in a controlled corridor. Add photocell at start of barrier. Induction loop and floor and radar above door. Length of barriers from door was such that truck could not travel length of barrier even at full speed and arrive at door without the door having opened due to any or all of the 3 triggering slash sensor mechanisms. And we added in a big safety factor, and the trucks had to turn 90 degrees to get between barriers, so they weren't even at full speed when they triggered the first sensor. It took 2 days to get a door destroyed. Story 38. Not an engineer, but actually an engineering assistant. Me and my buddies, who were also engineers, decided to make a dildo ballista. Thing went over 400 FPS. It was more than enough to bust a door down. Of course, enter one of our non-engineering students, I'll call him Mike, who decided to try and wield this thing. Keep in mind, this thing was large and heavy, and it took 4 of us to even wield it properly because otherwise it was not going to be aimed right. Anyways, Mike tries to aim it and fire it off, much to our displeasure and annoyance as we told him not to, but since it didn't have a trigger or a traditional catch, and was instead shot akin to a crossbow as ballista, he misfired it, which the projectile ricocheted and shot him in the balls. From there, we put in a safety feature which allowed the band to catch, but it doesn't fire without a long trigger pull. Bonus. Due to our new feature, we had inadvertently increased the velocity to 470 FPS. So, whoop, TLDR. Engineering students built a sex toy ballista. Non-engineering friend F's with it like an idiot, and we had to make an actual safety catch for it, which increased the velocity and force. You know, can you really design something like this in the first place and have the nerve to call someone else an idiot? Just saying. Come on, let's grow up, guys. Story 39. Many moons ago, I managed a support function in cybersecurity that included a sysadmin group. They had gotten lazy and were repurposing laptops throughout the organization without properly updating them and removing the previous user's files first. So I had them go through a 2-step process of wiping the laptop and putting on a fresh build from corporate to make sure they were up to date and didn't include any prior user's data. We built custom boot disks that were to be used for the wiping. They were printed on storage blank DVD-Rs, which we paid extra for. They were only available to sysadmin staff. The staff were explicitly told, writing was on the desk, to never boot a machine with a disk unless the intent was to wipe the machine and start from scratch. And the scripted process had several very loud and garish screens warning, "This will delete the entire hard drive irreversibly. Do you want to continue?" Despite all of this, we were forced by audit to have the machines log on to the corporate network first, and then query the sysadmin for their SSO password before wiping the machine. Why? Because despite all that, 3 machines had been inadvertently wiped. Those people are the reason you get warnings on Windex bottles. Story 40. I'm not an engineer, but a heavy equipment mechanic. We have one very big garage door on the side of our building. There are 2 large signs on either side of the door in English and Chinese, big customer base, that say "Do not enter." A line painted on the ground that says "Stop, do not enter" in it. A 4-foot by 10-foot orange sign that says "Customer Entrance" with arrows pointing to the front of the building, with arrows painted on the ground also going to the front of the building, and a chain that hangs across the doorway with another sign that says "Staff Only." I wish I was kidding when I tell you that even with all that, at least 2 people a day walk into the shop and are genuinely surprised when they're confronted. My favorite one was the dude who literally hit his head on the sign, clanging from the chain as he ducked under it, then argued with me for 5 minutes about how he's there to pick up his machine. Like, dude, do you see a desk with a cash register? When you go to McDonald's, do you go in the back where they keep the dumpster and demand service? The hell is wrong with you people? Story 41. Late to the party, but here goes. A grad level supervisor poorly cleaned a chem station and proceeded to eat his lunch at that station. The previous students working on that station were working with a cyanide compound. The lab supervisor suffered but didn't die. During a company freeze, a systems architect fat fingered a script and pushed a global software update that forced a reboot to all domain servers internationally during a live demo of a product to board of investors. This is one of my top favorites. A director level constantly complains about slow laptop. Security team advised him to stop going to suspicious sites, in which he angrily yelled at them that all he does is work while he's home. Then the IT team would have to re-image his laptop. This happened about 5 times. Then the director of security got involved and in front of everyone showed how he was watching adult content from multiple shady sites and exactly when he clicked on start webcam now, he got infected. He thought cleaning his history was enough to hide his footsteps. By the way, if you work for a top 50 Fortune 500 companies, you sign off on all your data privacy rights when using IT equipment. There are many advanced tracking software that tracks every single character you type, every website you go to. Clearing cookies in history will not help you. There are rules to protect your privacy to a certain degree, but if the company ever needs to create a case against you or to collect proof, They can fully audit you so easily. I'm no longer in this field, but I will tell you, there are so many sick people out there. Story 42. Instrument guy here. We had a chemical contact chamber with a very complex cascade control system. There were about a dozen controllers interacting and indicating. The head operator would constantly adjust knobs and screw up the process. Eventually, we decided to shut the whole system off and just use one analyzer, one valve, and one controller because it worked better. Before we put the thing back in service, we wired the controller input so the meters jump around when the operator turns the knobs. None of it did anything. He would go every day and move knobs and watch meters until he eventually retired. We set the only working controller at the correct set point and put an out of service label on it. Story 43. Just in general, the insane size and quantity of warning labels that have to be all over everything, like a riding lawnmower. If you don't know that blades are sharp, mufflers are hot, and you shouldn't stick your hand into moving belts, you have to be a real idiot. To be fair, it's mainly so that if you do hurt yourself, the corporate lawyers can say, "We told you not to do that," but it ruins the aesthetics of a lot of equipment. Moreover, it causes people to ignore things that should actually be warnings, because now the paradigm is that every warning is just painfully obvious BS. Story 44. Worked on the railroad. You and the safety rules are crazy sometimes. Imagine every time someone gets hurt, they make a new rule or try to prevent it in other ways. No room for common sense or logic. So electric trains run on those power lines above the track. Scary, angry pixies live in the power lines, and of course, some people want to meet them, or do by mistake when climbing a train. So one year they decide we need yellow danger signs everywhere, and I mean everywhere. Not just trains and wagons, but every power line post, 60 meters apart, feet by 3, every bridge, and they all need cleaning. As to the engineering, every kind of post needs its own design, depending on the dimensions of the post, materials like iron, galvanized concrete, plastic spacers, and grounding to avoid buildup from the magnetic field. A sticker is not good enough for the world of bored railroad engineers. Most could be installed with the same new tension, perfect installment tool they invented. So that's something. Maybe one day this saves a life, and all the time installing and
Cheers.
cleaning these signs will be worth it. But I bet the guy is going to earn his Darwin Award some other day. Story 45. Not me personally, but in a different module in a factory I used to work in, a guy stuck his hands into a heated acid vat to grab material he had dropped. His PPE saved him from chemical burns, but he did end up with second-degree burns. I saw their modules process engineer walking around our area and looking at the acid vats. He said he was considering putting up "don't stick your hands in the acid" signs up, and we joked about "no swimming" signs instead. Story 46. In the vein of social engineering, I was part of an emergency management in and around the zombie trend at the time. As part of in-house revisions, I started including zombie tie-ins to general purpose and awareness. It made buy-in jump significantly that helped stupid real situations by simple participation and meme reinforcement. Story 47. Long before the eponymous Murphy installed a set of sensors backwards so they didn't work, our Buckminster Fuller wrote an essay in prose about control by adequate design of misuse. The short name for the process is don't proofing. Working in a customer facing position, just engineering a space so people are able to figure out how to navigate it is impossible. You can design for 98%, but there's always a persistent 2% that will actively thwart everything you put in place to prevent their blunderings. Even if you literally stand at the door and tell each person personally what to do, not do, or expect, 2% will immediately ask or do the opposite of what you just said and get all agitated at you at the results. Case in point, when COVID hit, the office at my auto shop closed and all business was done outside. I put up 3-day glow neon colored signs saying to not enter the office. Months into the shutdown, huge numbers of people were still going in. So I started an experiment to see if there was a number of signs that was enough to get the 98% up to 99.5%. Every time someone went in, I added another do not enter sign. It got up to 9 signs before I gave up and took down all but the original 3 before losing the last shreds of hope for humanity. There were signs taped over the middle handle you'd have to grasp and wrinkle. Didn't matter. A chair placed in front of the door, again with 2 bright do not enter signs you'd have to grasp and move the chair. 2 pictograms and even a blow-up of a Gandalf, "You shall not pass" meme. The same persistent 2% could not be swayed or changed. When I went to Mother's Day brunch with my mom right after her county first reopened for outdoor dining, she did the same thing and I wanted to explode. The hostess told us, "We're going to walk through the restaurant to the outdoor patio now." My brother and I walked through, but my mom stopped in the doorway and spun around. causing the hostess girl to have to jump back and catch the door again, and says in an annoying sing-song voice at a casual conversational pace, "Oh, so I guess we're eating inside?" Story 48. I'm not an engineer, but I can relate to this. Was working on a website redesign in 2020, and one of our head salespeople providing input for a specific market told us to include something above the fold to tell people to scroll down. Our whole dev team ignores this request because who the hell needs to be told to scroll down? We now have a header that says scroll down for more resources because people seriously could not figure it out. Story 49. Back in the day, I was an IT engineer in the Army. I was given the task to write procedures that anyone could follow. I spent a couple days on the procedure to ghost, reset, laptops that had been in the field. The Sarge got this guy to test it without any help. First step was connect the laptop to the switch with an Ethernet cable and confirm the light goes green. Dipstick used two separate unconnected cables and tried for 30 minutes to work out why the light wasn't green. He had 6 months of IT training. At this point, Sarge turned to me and said, "You failed," and walked out laughing his head off. Story 50. Outside plant engineer here. In 1996, we were put on all hands Fix Utah project. The Olympics were coming, and all of Utah's planners and engineers were working on that. And we were to pick up the slack on the day-to-day jobs that needed to be worked. I'd finished one job, a simple buried straight-line copper distribution, no big deal. I finished it up, and they told me to run it by Randy, the senior OSP engineer from Utah. I got the job back with a note to allocate money for custom armored plating for the pedestals, the green ugly things in your front or backyards. Why? Because apparently the locals use them for target practice, and the armor had to withstand a direct hit from a 30-06. Never had to do that anywhere else I worked, but I haven't worked everywhere yet. Story 51. Our head engineer would be sent off to other companies in the group to troubleshoot problems for them they couldn't solve. One of his sites had a problem of red plastic pieces in the finished product, like plastic bag material. He's flown from Europe to Asia to investigate. It was a powder mix that was being created by blending other powders together. He gets to site, they show him the end of the line where this red stuff is coming out in the product. Naturally, he goes to the start of the process to work his way through eliminating causes. First thing he sees at the start of the line is a worker chucking bags of ingredients into one of the hoppers. The bags were red and plastic. He takes a closer look. They've built a shredding mechanism on top of the hopper so that the worker just has to chuck the bag in the hopper and the shredder will rip it open. This logic here was to save time not having to open the bags. He asked the site manager if they were having him on, i.e. taking the piss, and they weren't. They literally couldn't connect the dots that this was the source of the red plastic pieces. The solution was to stop doing that. Story 52. We had the side doors to our office refitted with keypads to make it easier for employees to go in and out while maintaining a locked egress point. People would have to move the interior handle to keep the door unlocked so they wouldn't have to input their code. They would leave it unlocked at night, causing security issues. So I put tape on the lock and a note saying, "Leave door locked for security reasons." 2 days later, I see tape moved and door unlocked. I then hot glue the lock and put tape on it with another note, "Door is to remain locked as per company policy. Failure to do so will result in disciplinary action." 2 days later, tape is moved and hot glue has been dug out. Word is manager on that side of building authorized employee to open the lock again. Now I'm pissed. Respect my authority. I take a chisel and hammer to the lock portion into the body of the door handle, superglue the interior, encase outside in epoxy, cover in tape, and place a note on door. Failure to abide by company policy has forced this. Any attempt to bypass the closing and locking of this door will be met with termination by owner's name. 2 days later, there's a effing block holding the door ajar, which I noticed when I left late and saw light coming out of the door. I bolted the effing door shut and had all fire exit signs moved and told fire inspectors it was due to structural damage. Story 53. Software developer wrote a program for checkout at a store. If someone entered an incorrect product to the cart, there is an option to remove it. All items in the cart were numbered, and if you wanted to remove one, it would ask you, which line do you want to remove? Once you entered the value, I'd do some error checking, like is the value greater than 0? Does the line actually exist? Etc. Well, turns out I get a call saying it's crashing when they try to remove the line. I ask what they're doing and they say press the button. The thing pops up asking which line. They enter the first one and it crashes. I try a million things on my end and I can't reproduce the issue. So I drive up to the store, 1 hour long drive, the day before Christmas, and ask the employee to show me. Turns out she was literally entering the first one, quote unquote, on the text field. rather than just one. I lost so much faith in humanity, but also learned an important lesson. People are effing stupid, and you need to account for that in software. I told her to enter the number. She was baffled, like she didn't know why it didn't occur to her to try that. I fixed it 2 days later, Ali G, with every other text field. Yeah, when it comes to writing instructions and showing people how to do things, you need to be as specific as possible. It's always better to over explain than assume that your audience knows anything at all. Story 54. X is a civil engineer. He had to go to court because one of the trash truck workers wouldn't stop eating the salt they laid out for snow. He literally had to go talk about why it isn't safe to eat and how he put up literature saying as much. The lady kept eating it, got sick, and tried to sue the city. She tried to say that working was making her eat it unintentionally, but nobody rides on the back of the truck when they're spreading salt. She was going back there and eating it on her own. She also got caught on camera eating it, back at the base. Story 55. Ever remove a computer case and find a burrito in it? Well, one of the workers would hide his food in the case because they weren't supposed to have food at their workstation. Well, he must have forgot it because we opened this computer that wasn't booting up properly to a
That's
full file of
funny.
insect life and what I think was green and
Who
black
does
mold growing
that?
over the motherboard. We chucked it. The guy who it was assigned to got fired because he already had several warnings for
Jeez.
spilling drinks on peripherals or leaving crumbs around his workstation. Who puts a burrito in a computer and forgets it? Burritos are delicious. Also, computer innards are dusty. Don't put food in there. Story 56. A gotcha stick is used when making fencing for machines to check how far people can reach into the fencing towards moving components and whether what you have is stupid proof or intentional proof enough. There's also a specific company that demands the screws used to put fencing together around machinery are safety type so that common tools can't take the fencing apart. Like they had issues with that before it was a rule. Story 57. Kim E. Maybe not the most ridiculous, but might be my favorite story. We used a nuclear level sensor to measure how full a hopper was in a highly flammable environment, so we didn't need to cut any penetrations in the side of the system and potentially leak solvent vapor. The nuclear source in these systems is encased in a heavy-duty lead box. We had to add half-inch thick stainless steel shroud around the back of the source after we walked in one morning to find hammer marks all along the outside of the box. The hopper had accumulated some buildup during the night, and the operator couldn't think of a better place to pound on to break it up than the nuclear source. Story 58. Civil engineer here. I had a project which involved the removal of 3 very old, very grand oak trees. The city zoning department's condition for removal of the trees was that the wood be preserved and used to make conference tables for the business college building being constructed on the site. We did all the legwork for the contractor. I spent weeks coordinating how big the pieces should be, where to store the pieces, and how to cut them. Even went so far as to put a phone number on the plans for the person at the college who would be responsible for moving and storing the wood after the trees were cut down. The contractor cut the trees down and immediately fed them through the wood chipper. Story 59. Not an engineer, but worked for a fireplace company when they had to start adding big stickers on our gas and wood fireplaces that say, paraphrase, but not far off, caution, fireplace extremely hot when in use. They were sued all the time for people getting burned for things such as, but not limited to, touching burning logs, fireplace tools sold separately, allowing children to place hand on fireplace glass, gas, melting/breaking TVs that were mounted on top without proper clearances/hardware, burning house down, or other damage from admitted misuse. To give some context to the last one, storing dry wood in front of the fireplace, storing camp fuel in plastic containers in front of the fireplace, changed log placement, gas, then discovered soot all over their room. You must do it the way they say, period. Tried to use the wrong gas type, LP/NG. There are many more, but it got me the most. There are folks out there who don't realize that fire is hot. Story 60. Designed a wireless industrial data collection system. I got the cost down to under $5 a unit with good supply lines. It's not a consumer product. It is about the size of a power adapter and is never meant to be seen or serviced unless it breaks. It was a solid engineering victory. Went and bought different colored cases because I predicted the CEO would ask why it didn't come in different colors, then make us go back to the drawing board. It did in fact happen, and I had several cases ready. I pointed out that the black one looked the best, and he bought it. Fortunate because the supplier only made black and beige cases, and they were all out of beige. So I idiot-proofed a project proposal by adding colorful case options to the prototype. Was a nice little Dilbert moment. Story 61. Marine engineer here. Power tools are constantly going missing from our workshop. There are only 10 people that have access to them. It drives my boss mad. He's always kicking off about things going missing. I suggested a sign out and in sheet for the expensive stuff to him and to restrict who has access to the keys. His response? I'm not using a sign out sheet. You are all grown men and can look after tools. A week later, two more drills have gone missing, and he's done nothing but complain that we can't look after our tools properly. Guess what? He's now suggested a sign out and in sheet, which was, of course, his idea. You know, there are a lot of battles to pick and choose throughout life, and this ain't one of them, my friend. Just let him have the victory. He clearly needs to have his ego fed here. Story 62. My dad worked for a computer networking company back in the 80s, and one site kept requesting help as the network was shut off and needed to be rebooted every night at about the same time. No matter what they tried, the system invariably shut down the same time in the middle of the night. Finally, they sent a tech out to physically watch the machine at the appointed time. Promptly, the janitor came in and unplugged the computer to plug in their vacuum. Story 63. I'm a chemical engineer and designed a small system that went onto a customer site to test a process. One day, the customer wanted to do a photo shoot to show off the new kit. This system includes a lot of pumps, and each has an independent motor drive mounted next to it with a small LED screen. When turned off, this screen reads "Stop." Now, the process had not yet finished commission and was empty and not hooked up to anything except electricity. An important fact is that you should never run a pump without liquid. It'll destroy the rotating parts. PR lady did not like the stop on all screens, so asked a technician to turn them on. I had told this guy beforehand it's empty and basically just for show. He told her this, but she ignored it and told him to do it anyway. Next day, I get a phone call saying the entire thing is broken, spewing smoke from all the burnt rubber in the pumps. Story 64. When I was a field engineer for an automation firm, we had to install a light curtain, industrial version of the laser tripwires you see in heist movies, around the base of a hydraulic scissor lift. Apparently, they had a similar system at another plant where some dude thought that hiding under that lift to take a nap was a great idea. Yes, the system was running. No, he did not wake up before it came back down. Story 65. Electrical engineer here. The amount of people that use the heat sink on a piece of equipment to warm their lunch is astounding. I've been called out to many Fortune 50 companies and secure DoD installations to troubleshoot overheating systems and find melted and burnt cheese covering the heat sinks. At more than one site, the facility crew was waiting around with their lunch boxes, hoping I'd fix it in time for them to be able to cook up their lunches. In one case, they had a whole pot of Texas chili ready to warm up on it. Story 66. Systems engineer here. Probably the least bona fide professional posting, but I've got some stories. Around 2009, I was working a contract to upgrade an unstable system. Bad-minded IT admins were shutting down high availability servers whenever something went wrong. The IT upgrade was already bought by the time I arrived, and the system was overdue despite the following narrative. Overall, my perspectives and very presence were met with resistance, and I didn't have time to teach them why reading logs is a good thing or how to begin doing so. At first, I removed the start menu options to shut down or restart on several relevant servers, only to find that they were using the chassis power buttons all along. So I figured out how to make the boxes appear to turn off but not actually shut down. They'd press the power button and it would turn off the screen and do nothing else for 60 seconds. The button press just sent me an email to advise me of their AirSAS solution. Run the blank screensaver and count to 60. At 61, it would turn the screen back on. Again, these weren't end users. These were administrators. There were many reasons why this shouldn't have worked, why this ruse should have been obvious. The only direct feedback I recall getting from their team was that it seemed faster at times. Story 67. I had to make a warning label for a large industrial ripsaw design, which explained that the DC injection brake wouldn't work if you turned off the main disconnect. The label was in response to someone turning off the main disconnect, sticking their hands in the saw blade pit without looking, and cutting off a few fingers. Apparently, looking at the blade to see if it was still spinning was too much to ask. Story 68. I've been designing complex systems for 16 plus years. I could write a book on this subject. There's always some level of moaning and groaning when a system you design goes through the risk assessment process, and people point out, we need extra guarding here, and here, and here, and there, and here. One time I had to add 8 feet of light curtains in front of a system so that, quote, operators can't get a running start and jump through the opening to the machine. I call that the Superman rule, which is in excess of all OSHA requirements. The sad part of that one is that someone did, indeed, Superman through while the system was running, which promptly mangled them and nearly cut them in half. Yes, they died. We had all of our documentation in line and every box was checked, so it was ruled as an intentional circumvention of established safety devices. On another system, I had to design an automated cup holder for operators, complete with through beam sensor. Why? Operators are known to throw garbage and pour drinks into systems to create downtime so they could get more break time while maintenance was fixing a machine that mysteriously broke. The cup holders would only release people's drinks during designated break times. I had a little PTSD when I played Wolfenstein New Colossus in the level where you have to intentionally break your machine to stage a distraction in prison. The worst one I ever sat through in terms of seriously, what kind of idiot would, was when I was designing a system for a certain auto manufacturer. It was a large system that was responsible for assembling and welding all sorts of variants across the entire line up of 100K plus vehicles. The components being welded were held in place by spring-loaded pins with complex geometries. I spent a considerable amount of time designing the pins so that you couldn't load them incorrectly, matching the geometry of the mating part. These poke yokes were expensive to begin with. After about a month of the system running at the customer's facility, the customer wanted me to add additional poke yoke features to the pins so they couldn't be installed in the wrong location and wrong machine. The fact that the part geometries wouldn't line up if you put the wrong pin in the wrong place was irrelevant. Certain operators were ramming these things into the wrong holes and causing system crashes. Mind you, this takes serious effort to do, to the point of cracking the parts. So across 9 of these systems, which I designed, I had to have 9 by 7 equals 63 unique pin designs. I accomplished this by having slots machined in and clocked in certain orientations, so they were essentially keys at this point, and cost upwards of $1,500 each to machine. 64 RC A2 hardened pins and D2 locating dies. Hard stuff. A few weeks later, all of the pins were machined, assembled, and delivered to the customer. I get a phone call that same week and was told, quote, "You need to get here. We can't run the systems." I got in my car, drove out to meet the customer. Their executive director was standing in the lobby waiting for me. We walked out to the systems, and I was told that my design, quote, jammed up the systems and is holding up production for the entire vehicle line, costing $30,000 per minute. We walked up to the first system, and sure enough, the pins were completely stuck in the dies. What the hell? I designed these things with a 0.003-inch MMC gap. It should be smooth like butter, and I tested every one myself before we shipped them. Every pin was jammed. The director was furious. I pulled up the assembly drawings and proved that the designs and tolerances were sound. I couldn't pull these things out, but I noticed the tops of the pins were crowned over, like someone had been smashing them with a 5-pound sledge. We continued walking to the other systems, and as we approached one, we heard a banging sound. Their maintenance lead was standing in front of one of the systems with a large hammer, absolutely wailing the pins in place. The director grabbed him by the shoulder, spun him around, and said, "What in the F are you doing?" The maintenance guy said, "The pins don't fit." I picked up one of the pins he hadn't mashed, showed him the keyed feature, pointed out the engraved ID, pointed out the engraved ID on the corresponding receiver die, and demonstrated that they fit absolutely perfectly fine when you mate them with the correct assembly. Oh, and it was color and number coded too. The director turned to me, said, "Quote me a new set," and stormed off. Story 69. Not me, but a coworker technician of mine. We needed a gasket of some kind put on one of our instruments. The metal bits were expensive and would take a few days to arrive. Instead of waiting, coworker took 2 Canadian quarters, as we were in Canada, drilled a hole through the middle that matched the gasket and stuck it in place. A 50-cent repair, and I think it's still there, a decade later. Story 70. I had to idiot-proof a UPS because of a terrible design rather than idiot users. The power button was on the front at hip height and stood out from the surface, so if anyone bumped into it, the room instantly went eerily quiet. What idiot designed that? We made a thick plate with a button-sized hole in it so you could lean on it all you liked, but anything smaller than a fingertip wasn't going in. Story 71. IT teacher in high school loved to tell this anecdote when we got into programming and best practices. Always assume the dumbest possible user. Once you're done programming, try to intentionally brick everything and find ways to stop yourself. Our school had a library that was operated by volunteers, usually people's moms. They had a small desk with a PC at the entrance to log stuff and help kids print out things and such. Cue one day, some kid asked one of them to print something from his USB stick, and what happened next must have traumatized this little guy for the rest of his life. The mom somehow managed to force the USB stick into the floppy drive with so much force that our IT teach had to take the PC apart to get the USB back. The floppy drive didn't make it. Idiot proofing was basically that there no longer was a floppy drive to violate. and that new library moms would now also get training on how to use a USB stick, including how to identify a USB port. What's the most thing you have ever done? Story 1. My grandmother moved in with us when I was a teenager and started to go senile. Our relationship quickly soured. Living with her was different from sending her letters and making phone calls. It was not her fault. You change when you start to lose your mind. But honest to goodness, I could not stand her. Everything was my fault. Every single thing she misplaced, I stole. I must have taken it. She could not accept that she just could not remember where she was putting things. The worst time she had a meltdown over photos she had misplaced and had my parents search my room while I insisted that I never touch them. I was a teenager. Why would I want her photos of the girl? I could simply go outside if I wanted to see it, for goodness sakes. One night I woke up because she was calling for me in that nasally trill she always had.
People who were in a coma, what was it like from your perspective? Did you know that you were in a coma? So, a friend of mine was in a 6-month coma after an accident. Afterwards, he made sure to tell everyone around him to talk to people in a coma because they can hear you. But he noted that they should always tell the person in a coma what happened, where they are, and what's happening to them, because he said that his moments of lucidity were mixed with some truly horrifying dreams, and he had trouble of distinguishing between what was real and what were dreams. He said he just wanted to be told what was real and what was happening. Next story. I was put into an induced coma when I was 9 years old after a pretty bad car accident, which left me with a fractured skull. All I remember is a bad dream about having a bad headache and hearing my older sister telling everyone, including my parents, to get the F out of her way because she wanted to see me. I found out later that this was on the night it happened and they were trying to calm her down before she saw me. Edit. For those who were telling me to let her know how awesome she is, I made sure to. Not quite, but almost hugged the life out of her when she got back from work. Next story. My friend was in a coma about 10 years ago for roughly 3 weeks. Car accident. When he woke up, we visited him, and when I was alone with him, he told me it was like a lucid dream. The real world was gone, and he felt like he was in a world that he could create himself for years. He was dead serious, too. He talked on and on about how he had a slight understanding that he was not in the real world anymore, and that he thought he might be in heaven, about how he felt like he was actually dying, and his last few seconds just stretched on and on forever. He said that's what it felt like. He mentioned that he could fly in the coma dream and that it was amazing. He spent a little while in the hospital, then went home, did physical therapy for about 2 weeks before taking his life with pain pills and vodka. People thought the pain was too much, that it was an accidental overdose, or that the therapy and the accident made him feel helpless and depressed. Honestly, I think he wanted to go back into his lucid dream world. The way he talked about it was like the best thing he ever experienced. Next story. I don't know. I was in a coma for 11 days, severe brain injury. I don't remember being in a coma or waking up from one. I lost several years of memories prior to the coma, and my brain didn't really start to retain information again until around 6 weeks after I came out. I'm told that my personality changed afterwards as well. I had to rebuild most areas of my life. It sucked, but it was probably a good thing. Although I'd be lying if I said I never wondered what my life would be like if I'd never had that coma. Next story. After being in a really bad accident that left one of my good friends, the driver, brain dead, they put me into a chemically induced coma for under a week to prevent brain damage due to swelling. When I first woke up, my memory was much better than it was as it gradually faded in the days to come. I have a journal my mother recorded things in, and I recalled many things I shouldn't have been able to immediately after waking up. Today, I have little memory of it at all, but I can definitely say that having positive people around you definitely helps when you're in a situation like that. If you have a friend in this situation, don't disregard them. Even though your life has moved on, they may wake up one day, and in their mind, not a day has passed since that last conversation they had with you. Hello, everybody. I would just like to say, I don't know when this video is going up, but I'm recording this the day or the day after we got monetization back, so I am in a very good mood. We recorded a few videos while we were in that awkward phase fighting YouTube, but this is the one I'm recording after Undersparked has been remonetized, and we can start making that bread again, you know what I mean? Because we love you guys, but also, I got bills to pay, and so do the other narrators. But anyway, guys, I'm so happy. Anyway, next story. So, I was out for 45 days. No white light, no tunnel, nothing. Woke up and couldn't remember who I was. For 6 months, never really fully recovered, so I just started life again. Turns out I'm a completely different person than I was, and that is a really good thing. I get memories now and then, and they aren't pleasant. A woman came by and sat by my bed for 6 weeks. Turns out she was my ex-lover. I couldn't remember her. I didn't recognize my mother either. Then, afterwards, this is the second time in my life I have related this much about my life publicly, and it has been good, and at the same time, really painful. Thanks to everyone for being kind. I wrote this story 7 months ago and published it in the lounge, and I really hurt myself doing it. This time, I wanted to share about the life afterwards, and I hope it has been of some benefit to others that struggle with mental issues. This place, it saves lives, it gives hope and guidance to millions of people, and I feel lucky to be a part of the community. Next story. I'm not sure where I read it, but a girl talked about her experience, and she mentioned that it was like going in and out of sleeping slash dreaming. Just when she would feel like she was waking up, she could hear parts of conversations or the TV, but she would slip right back into sleeping. She also said when people would clean her, she could feel them touch sensitive parts of her, like her armpit and butthole area. I'm an inpatient phlebotomist, and even though some of my patients are sedated, I still always introduce myself and say I'm here to draw some blood, just in case they could hear me. Next story. My girlfriend of 6 years and sort of fiance was in a severe car crash when she was 16. One of her best friends died instantly. She was the only survivor, but they didn't think she would make it. She was in a coma for 9 months. She was in what is called a waking coma. She retained normal periods of sleep and open-eyed wakefulness, but no higher brain functions. And here are some things about her experience. She doesn't have any memories of the year prior or the year and a half-ish after her coma, and obviously no memories of the car crash. She suffered a TBI, and when she first got out of the coma, she would get naked and sexual with people, and angry very easily. These are common problems of people who suffer a TBI. She went back to school after the coma, but her brain was still healing a lot. She was held back another year because her brain was still not retaining anything. But today, she is a wonderful, bright 30-year-old with a college degree. She has a slight speech impediment, gets frustrated easier than most, and it took her a while to get driving down. Honestly, she still scares the hell out of me when she drives, but there are worse drivers out there. Next story. I was in a coma for about 2 weeks, following a cardiac arrest as a teenager. I was technically dead for over an hour. In fact, people often ask me if I could hear my own family talking to me or if I was dreaming, but the answer is no. There was a huge hole in my memory beginning about 2 weeks before the coma through a week after waking up. And waking up is in quotes because I would wake up, ask a bunch of semi-incoherent questions, fall back under, then wake up again and ask the exact same questions in the exact same order. Repeat 6 or 7 times. Then the coma was not even blackness. It just does not exist. I remember having the hardest time believing it was actually mid-October, when the last day I remembered was late September. Next story. My mom was in a coma, and she recently told me it was horrible. She was in a wreck that killed her technically 5+ times. Heart stopped, and she said she could feel all of the pain, hear the doctors yelling that she was being coded. She said she thought to herself, wow, whoever that is must be dying, and then realizing it was her. She was trying to scream and tell them she was alive, but nothing ever came out. And also, for clarification, when I said she was clinically dead 5 times, I was just detailing the severity of the situation. She was in a coma right after that for a really long time and described the coma, the inability to scream, hearing people, pain, etc., from while she was in the coma. Next story. Yeah, how I ended up dead is kind of a long story, but anyways, I had gone to bed one night and I hadn't been feeling well for a couple of weeks. Thought it would go away eventually. I remember feeling confused and somewhat found myself in a dreamlike state, although I was pretty lucid in it as well. There was quite a bit of psychedelic-like experiences, and it felt like such a long dream. It just kept going on and on. I didn't have a body anymore. And I actually asked myself, am I dead? Since this couldn't be a dream, usually when I become aware of dreams, I wake up. And I wasn't waking up. It felt like it went on for so long. But what was going on, this part I had no recollection of. I guess somewhere or sometime in my sleep, I had stopped breathing. I may have had a seizure at some point, and I was pretty lucky family had stopped by the house to check in on me. They noticed my car was still in the driveway, which meant I wasn't at work and I wasn't getting the door. But looking through the window, they could see me just laying there in bed, not moving. I wasn't responding either, so they went through a window and I was unresponsive. 911 was called, etc. I believe it took them a couple of hours trying to get me back and keep me stable, but my lungs weren't working, so they had to intubate, and I was in a coma with life support, all that fun stuff for about 2 days. They ran a bunch of tests. I don't remember getting a spinal tap or catheter or all the IVs and blood draws, etc. I was still pretty much in the other place for a long time. It felt like I was traveling through space or something. I saw and experienced a lot of amazing things that I can't explain or remember well anymore, but I did try to write down some of it later. I wasn't scared. It felt like a really long journey. I didn't necessarily see anyone for a while, but I didn't feel alone. I felt the presence of others. It was like I was around everyone I ever knew or something. It felt quite familiar in a way. There was this black, infinite darkness, and it was the most wonderful thing. It was like I could create experiences with my imagination. There was no sadness. It was all bliss without worry, and it was very hypnotizing. I really considered letting myself go into it, just letting go. My lungs were not kicking in on their own. If they had not, then I'm told I could have stayed dead, or been paralyzed, or ended up a vegetable. However, I didn't want to let go, though. I have a daughter who is my world. She was just about a year old at the time, and I kept thinking of her and her mother. It kept me from just letting go into that peaceful bliss. I couldn't leave them. I did get some of that life flashing before you type of experience. It looked like a projector was cast a bit in front of me and kind of like a movie, but I didn't see myself or anything like that. What I saw was almost like memories, except I hadn't had these yet. I saw my kiddo and her mom, maybe because I'd been thinking of them a lot, and they were smiling and happy. My daughter looked a couple of years older in that vision, though. There were a few visions, but all I saw was them, and I remember it making me feel quite happy. I would have smiled and cried if that had been possible. After that, it was getting quiet and dark. I remember it was all black. I didn't know how to get back, though. Black, black, the darkest I've ever seen, and felt so empty. Not scary, but I was in some infinitely large void. Time wasn't really a thing, but I was just sort of there for a good while. I remember seeing a tiny little dot of light so far away, just a little, and it was the only thing different from the blackness. Then I felt I was falling towards it or being pulled by some force. It felt like I was traveling very fast, like through space again, but it still took quite a long time. And the little thing got larger and larger as I got closer. It was the size of the moon eventually, and I just kept falling towards it. Eventually, when I got close enough, it felt like I was thrown back into myself with really great force. The white was blinding, and as I was back in, all my field of vision was initially incomprehensible, but the light died down, and I was able to make out shapes, etc. I was still comatose. I couldn't move or speak or anything. I saw what looked like a hospital room, and at this point, I still was not sure if this was real or not. No way. No, but this can't be a dream, though. They don't last this long and don't feel this real. The world, it still didn't make sense either. I thought I had died and gone to hell or something, and I'd spend eternity trapped in my body, unable to move or do anything. I could hear sounds. I saw a clock on the wall, and I'd look over, but the time seemed all wrong, or it would jump around. There was a board on the wall with writing, but it made no sense. A window, a tiny window on the left side, the only window to the outside, but all I could see was a brick wall and a TV playing some nature stuff that really freaked me out. I couldn't see people for a while, which had me questioning reality. I'd see nurses kinda go past, but they didn't seem real at all. Almost not even three-dimensional and choppy, unrealistic movement. They'd pass by, but it was almost like no one really noticed me. I knew it was real. Well, either I was in the hospital or I was dead or in some sort of hell. But everything was becoming more detailed as time went on. I could read the board. People looked a lot more real. I felt the breathing tube in my arms had been restrained so I wouldn't tear it out if I woke or something. I still couldn't talk or move or do anything though. I remember seeing some family and friends asking me to wake up, crying, telling me a lot of things, holding my hand, and I couldn't do anything. That was the worst part for me, seeing how hurt they were, crying and telling me I had to fight. I had to start breathing on my own soon. I couldn't cry. I was trying to yell, but nothing. I couldn't grasp their hands. Time was weird. I don't know how much passed or whatever in between the several moments I do remember. I know eventually I was by myself again. A doctor came in, and I guess I had regained a little movement, and my lungs finally kicked in. She took out the breathing tube. It was bugging me when I had started to be able to move a little, and took the catheter out as well. I didn't feel it. Family was able to come in an hour or two later. I could hardly talk, just barely move hands, arms a little, turn my head a little bit. I developed the worst migraine I've ever known, worst pain I've ever felt, and that carried on for about a week, nonstop. I did get to hold my baby eventually, and I have a picture of that somewhere. I don't know where I got the strength, but I picked her up and I smiled, hugged her, after I lost all my strength again. Took a while, but I got to talk to a lot of people and doctors in the following days, etc., slowly recovering. But in that time, I couldn't really eat. I basically had water when possible. I couldn't keep food down for at least a week or sleep. I slept once for 30 minutes or so, but I felt the pain all the way through. Probably by day 3 or 4, I was able to start getting up and walk to the bathroom, etc. I was hospitalized for about a week before I could go home. This was a year ago, and I'm still trying to get past this experience. I suppose I developed PTSD, and my anxiety got so bad in the following months, going into full-blown agoraphobia. I had insomnia really bad for a while. I still do, actually. For about a month, I had nightmares about hospitals and feared that I would stop breathing if I fell asleep. Uncontrollable crying, and broke down a lot when I had first came to, and for a good while after. I felt guilty because I missed being on the other side, and I'd really considered just letting go into that amazing bliss, that peace. I missed it, and at times wished I had just stayed there. I left out a lot, but that's all I could get down at the moment. Next story. I was in a medically induced coma following a self-inflicted gunshot wound. I don't remember much, but my family described moments of me appearing to be awake. Most notable, an apparent attempt at humor. Apparently, they put these mitts on my hands to prevent me from ripping my ventilation tubes out over and over, but I pretended they were lobster claws. I have no recollection, but it's a real me move. OP, I would just like to say, I'm there with you, bro. I want to have lobster claws just for a day, maybe a few, not even for a day, but like a few hours, just a couple of minutes. So yeah, lobster. Let me stop. Anyway, next story. So I know this will get buried, but I'll post my experience anyway. I went to the hospital with renal failure and a pulse OX reading of 32. I remember the nurse saying my pee looked like root beer, and when she stabbed my arm to give me an IV, all she said was, "Uh-oh." My arm? It got really warm, and my dad moved my head so I wouldn't see. How much blood was coming out. Next thing I know, I'm in a hospital bed, tearing through the desert at 60 miles an hour, nothing but me in a hospital bed, no motor, nothing, just cruising through the desert. I'd see all sorts of weird things. Most specifically was Ronald McDonald. I saw him all the time. Then my hospital bed would come to a screeching halt and I'd be in the living room of someone I knew. Grandma, good friends, former coaches. Basically any living room I had spent time in with someone I cared about. The weird thing was the living room walls were always three-walled. One wall was missing, and beyond that wall was a barren desert. We would talk for a while about God knows what, then I'd be pulled back into the desert cruising at 60 miles per hour again. It happened over and over again. Sometimes the same living rooms would reappear, but almost all of them were unique. When I came out of the coma, everyone kept commenting how good my hair looked. I couldn't figure out why they kept saying that, so I finally asked my mom how long I'd been sleeping, and she said 13 days. And I had cards and flowers from all these people whose living rooms I'd been visiting in my coma. It was surreal, and I definitely can't explain it, especially since most of the cards came from people who weren't allowed to visit me in intensive care and were sending well wishes in writing, not in person. Next story. Oh, I can answer this one. I was in a medically induced coma for 2 weeks, about 3 months ago. I had open heart surgery. It didn't go well. Had trouble coming off the ventilator, so they just put me in a coma to try to give me time to heal. I had nightmares the entire time from the medicine they were using to knock me out. I thought I had been kidnapped by a nurse and was a victim of trafficking. I thought my drug addicted aunt had her friends rob my sister and her husband, killing my brother in law and one of their children. And I thought I was constantly being grabbed by people under my bed. It was not fun. I can't say that I knew I was in a coma or anything. I'm usually one of those people that when I have a bad dream, I can tell myself it's just a dream and wake myself up in order to end it. But this was not like that. I was convinced it was all really happening. Next story. One time, I overdosed on meds and alcohol while in my locked room and woke up shortly afterwards, finding myself in my bed with my two housemates next to me, freaking out. I was so irritated that I didn't die that I immediately got out of bed and shoved both of them away and stormed out the door without my phone or my watch or wallet. I then did some dumb crap outside and cops took me to a mental hospital. It wasn't until the doctor told me the date that I did realize I'd actually been in a coma for like a week. To this day, I'm still not sure how long I was out for exactly. So the coma felt like nothing. It felt like I somehow lost consciousness, fell asleep, and woke up shortly after. I didn't know I was in a coma until after the doctor told me. Next story. 3 weeks at the age of 7. I had no idea and would have these blips through time, but everything was wonky. We hit a tree, doing 90 miles per hour after our brakes gave out at the top of a mountain. I could hear the doctor, and there's this image that looks like there's pictures, but I don't see them in any physical manner, if that makes sense. They were octopus head people and had these crazy shapes everywhere that would fall into themselves and repeat. I think I may still have some lingering brain damage. I'd scream, I'm dead, in my head, and this warm glow would tell me, it's okay, you're here now. I have no idea where there was, but it was pretty comforting. I felt like I was on a cloud and I was weightless, zipping around everywhere and nowhere all at the same time. As I get older, I forget more and more, and my head is screaming at me not to forget, like it was something important to remember. I get angry because I can't remember that shape or that face or that place. I often get scared and wonder, am I going crazy? I'll see a light zip around me and leave this burning trail in the air. Or I'll see the blood vessels in my eyes and these balls of light that pulsate with my heartbeat. I'm super sensitive to electricity pulses, and sometimes I swear I see them in the air. I don't know if anyone else has had a similar experience. I don't claim to know the answers of the universe, but I feel like that place is somewhere we can or do go. It's just so different, and I don't know how to describe it. Next story. This is really bizarre, but my uncle, a very serious, strict, and rather dry man, had an accident and went into a coma a few years back. He never believed anything he couldn't touch, no talks about souls or anything similar. He was in a coma for a few weeks until he woke up and had this crazy AF story. He said he saw himself in a bubble, floating around in a white place, and it was peaceful and beautiful. But then he said about other bubbles he could see around him. All of them had other people in them. He distinctly remembered a black-haired woman singing in the bubble closest to his until one day her bubble bursted and she disappeared. When he woke up, he could give a very clear description of her body, her age, all of that. Now, the crazy bit? There was a woman one floor below him in a coma that sadly passed away before he woke up. You guessed it. Black hair, age, body, all correct. He had never met or seen this woman in his life. His whole idea of life changed after this. It still makes me think sometimes, where was he? He thinks all the people in the bubbles around him were patients in the same hospital. Could it be? Well, probably. Never know. All of these stories lean towards the spiritual side. But this one, um, guys, I don't have words for these stories, and they just make me feel a certain way. And I'm curious if any of you watching this have ever been in a coma, if you've experienced anything or nothing or what. I think the ones that scare me the most are the people who forget their lives and it doesn't come back to them, and then they come back completely different people. That is scary. What if I went into a coma, came out and said, I don't want to be a voice actor anymore? That's like half my identity. The other half is like being really fashionable for a straight man, so much so that people think I'm gay, but then I surprise them because I'm actually straight. But oh my God, that would be half my identity gone to the coma. That can't be. We can't allow that. Anyway, next story. So my brother-in-law was in a coma for a month after a car accident in which he lost his eye and almost died. He said that he had a vision of God holding him underwater 3 times, almost drowning him the third time, then him giving up and finally being led up into his hometown. He's had one almost fatal car accident after that, and while I'm not superstitious, I do believe sometimes reality can echo the future in ways which our minds can perceive sometimes, even if we can't fully interpret those echoes. Well, I simply believe he's eventually going to have a third accident, and I fear for him. The next story was in a coma for 3 weeks. During that time, I was definitely aware of people around me, of being in pain, and also at the same time, I had an alternate reality where my entire reason for returning to my life revolved around the knowledge that it was my turn to take care of a Native American woman I had never met, whom I would meet in the future, and that I would need to recover for this reason. When I woke up, I actually pulled out all of my tubes and tried to leave to start helping this person who lived where, I don't know. Help her how? I don't know. I thought I was on a reservation somewhere in Oregon, but was in fact in the city at a very busy, huge hospital right in the middle of town. I've kind of always been looking for her ever since. Next story. I was in a coma for a week. I don't remember anything, and it took 2 to 3 weeks after I woke up to understand it was a car accident that put me there. I told everyone my husband and I had collided skiing, which did happen, but certainly didn't cause any injury. I finally understood that we had had a head on collision with a logging truck. It took another 3 years before I felt like myself again. Crappy, crappy time. But that was back in 2001, and my husband and I are still married. I've read that when one partner gets a brain injury, 90% of marriages fail as a result. And true or not, I'm still proud of us. Next story. My brother was in a coma for a few months due to collapsed lungs. I live in Michigan and he lives in Las Vegas. And on Christmas, I flew out because they said he wasn't going to make it. Anyways, his wife and I spent the entire time in his hospital room talking and whatnot. A few months later, he wakes up and tells his wife that he remembers hearing me visit. However, he said he felt like he was trapped and buried alive. He couldn't move or talk, but could hear us, and he was terrified. This was 5 years ago, and he still has trouble sleeping because of the nightmares. He said they replay over and over in his head every time he sleeps. He also can't sleep in his bed and will sometimes sleep on the floor or the couch because it reminds him of the hospital bed. He doesn't like to talk about it at all. And we also had a friend who passed away during the time he was out, and he said he remembered having dreams about him as well, and they haunt him because he never got to say goodbye. Definitely PTSD from that situation. Next story. Maybe this is a story of coincidence, or maybe there are certain memories or stimulation which can force you out of certain states. Who knows? It would be truly interesting if we could have a functional MRI recording of his brain during the entire coma, just to see what the difference was. This is a true story. When my dad was dating my mom in high school, he would visit her at her grandparents' home. Her mom's parents also lived there, and he would always talk to my great grandfather, who was named Dave. Dave's favorite word was bullcrap, and would call him bullcrap and everything bullcrap. My dad would mess with him by giving a big kiss on the cheek when he wasn't paying attention. And he would have been in his mid 70s at the time. My dad was 17. 20 years later, Dave is not doing well at 96 or so and ends up in a coma. He's unresponsive for several days, but still alive. My dad goes to visit him, gets up in his face and started yelling, "Bullcrap, Dave!" and gave him a big kiss on his cheek. Dave woke up from his coma just like that. Everyone was speechless, except for Dave, who called him bullcrap. He lives for a few more years after that. Great man, illiterate till the day he died. Dropped out of high school in the second grade to work on a farm. Did not get drafted in World War II because he worked on railroad engines. Will never forget him. Also, I made this account so I could share this one story. This thread is great, and thank you everyone for sharing. Also, not sorry for the cursing because, well, Dave never was. Next story. I was in a coma for about 2 days when I was 22. I had Crohn's and had been in a severe flare for a few weeks prior. Lots of blood loss, unable to eat, dehydrated, etc. I fell asleep on my parents' couch. The next thing I remember is waking up in the ICU and thinking about how I needed to use the restroom. Since I had no idea what happened or where I was, I just got up, or tried to anyway, and all the machines went off and a nurse came running into the room and told me to sit down. I don't remember anything that happened during the coma. No dreams, no sense of time moving, just like a dreamless sleep. Apparently, though, I was able to do basic commands in the coma. Like a doctor told me to open my eyes so they could take my contacts out, and I'd squeeze a hand if told to, but otherwise, I didn't move or respond to anything. I don't recall any of it, though. Doctors think I went into this coma as a way to preserve energy, to keep me alive. I had to get 5 pints of blood and had IV drips in both arms while I was out. It's weird to think about how it happened while I was there, and yet I have no memories of it. Next story. I was in a coma from December 31st, 2016 to January 3rd, 2017, so 4 days total. It was like being asleep or under anesthesia for me. I don't recall any dreams, nor was I aware I was in a coma. I only realized I was in a coma when I woke up in the hospital's ICU on life support. Some people have asked me if I was afraid of falling asleep after being in a coma, but I wasn't since my coma was self-induced. Self-unaliving attempt via medication overdose. My GCS, Glasgow Coma Scale, it was a score of 3, which I believe is the lowest number on said scale. One of the first responders, a captain of my city's fire department, told me I was so close to death that I was knocking on heaven's door, he said. I think the captain was right, since I knew the amount of medication I ingested would be enough to cause me to be in a coma within 5 minutes and dead within 30 minutes. My medical records say I must have lost consciousness very quickly, since they found me on the floor with my bones still in my hand while barely breathing. Next story. I'm a nurse in a neurological ICU. All of us are taught that it is possible for comatose patients to still be cognitive despite their obvious inability to communicate. It's standard and well-known practice of effective nurses and other healthcare team members to always discuss the plan of care and constantly reorient patients despite their neurological status, whether the patient is merely confused with a GCS of 14 or in a coma. And for thought's sake, imagine being stuck, being pinched, being catheterized, feeling IV infusions, feeling BP cuffs and SCDs constantly inflate, deflate, hearing alarms and voices. Doors are always open in ICUs also. Imagine being touched at least hourly, being exposed for assessments, not knowing where you are or what day it is or who's around you, being in unreportable pain, etc. And no one explaining what's happening, why, or when. A nightmare, counterintuitive to healthcare, and a violation. I don't know if all patients in comas are aware, or even any bit cognitive, but it's our duty to treat every single one of them like they're human, because they are. If you haven't heard many stories, both good and bad, please just YouTube some. And keep reading comments here, of course. If you're in healthcare, they're great reminders, but regardless, they're intriguing and frankly amazing. A big thank you to everyone who has experienced a coma or anything like it for sharing your story and giving the rest of us knowledge of such a phenomenon. It is so good to hear patient experiences and wonderful that they are in the past. Next story. Well, I definitely have an experience with this that I wish I didn't. Typing from mobile, so this may be a bit rough, but I have a pretty severe asthma, and we were detail cleaning the house upon my 3-day-old daughter's homecoming from the hospital. During the process of cleaning, something heavy was thrown into a trash can I was standing over that seemed to be empty. That is what got to me. A cloud of dust and dirt and gunk flew up right to the air right in my face, and instantly triggered the most severe asthma attack I have ever had in my life. I immediately took my rescue inhaler, and it did absolutely nothing. I managed to get my nebulizer and started treatment, but started shaking and having spasms so badly it looked like I was seizing. My parents were helping clean, and by this time they had run into my room. I looked right at my mom and said, "Mom, I'm dying." And they called 911, and I very rapidly watched the world close in around me like it was getting smaller as I suffocated. They tell me I made it down the stairs into the yard before I passed out, but I don't remember doing so. My mind shut off at the top of the stairs. Fast forward 16 hours and the world suddenly turns back on, but not entirely. I could not think. I could not move. I could not speak. There was nothingness, but not even a cognitive nothingness, just a void. I felt tugging on my body all over, like something was just pulling on me at every part of my body. After what seemed like an eternity of this, cognitive thoughts started to come back in my mind, and it was only one thing. Where's my baby? I was searching for her in the void. It wasn't dark, it wasn't light, it was nothing. I feel like I searched for her for thousands of years, never making any progress and never processing any other thoughts. Suddenly, a switch flipped off to on, and all my thoughts came back to me. The panic intensified of wanting to find my daughter even more, but then my eyes finally opened, and I could see my family all around me in the emergency room. I had no idea what happened. I couldn't speak. I'd been intubated and machines were breathing for me, keeping me alive. I learned I had been in the void for 15 hours, in a coma. This hit me like a ton of bricks. I couldn't think straight, and I couldn't communicate. I know basic sign language and started frantically trying to spell out, "Where is my baby?" but nobody could understand me. Everybody's freaking out because they had been told there was a chance I was never going to come back. And then suddenly, there I was. They managed to get me a marker and some paper to write on it, where I immediately wrote the question I had been thinking of the entire time I was gone. Where is my baby? What happened? I had no memory of what happened and did not even know I was gone. They explained again what happened and told me I was on a pretty heavy dosage of drugs, including ketamine. I began to feel extremely disassociated with my surroundings and thought I should still be dead. Legitimately thought I didn't belong in the land of the living and wanted to go back to the void. I learned later this was called a ketamine hangover and it lasted for hours. They also told me I had to be defibrillated during transport to the hospital because I had flatlined on the ride over. I then spent 6 days and 7 nights in the hospital with pneumonia in my lungs and stubborn spotting on my lungs that did not go away until the very end of the stay. I was miserable, but I was alive and ready to get home to my baby. My last thought before my consciousness faded was, my daughter is going to grow up and never see me. I will die and she won't even remember me. And this incident has caused extreme PTSD for me. It has caused an extreme fear of that switch going off again, like I know it someday will for good. But that's the funny part to all of it for me, though. Once it's off, it will no longer matter to me, but every single day of my life, what happened haunts me and terrifies me that it will happen again. It's been a little over a year now since the accident, and I think about it every day. I totally understand why people say they had visions or saw God when they have an experience like this, because I truly believe that your mind jumps to its ultimate comfort. Last thoughts when it does. That's just my experience. Sometimes it feels good to talk about it, but it's extremely difficult to do so. Thanks for reading if you stuck around. So, really quick, OP said something that stuck with me when they said, I truly believe that your mind jumps to its ultimate comfort and last thoughts when it does. That's really intriguing. I might have to think about that as we continue throughout the course of this video. I wonder if the disposition or the mindset or beliefs of that person and their perhaps emotional and mental stability has anything to do with this. I would assume so. Like, if the heart and mind are in balance, like, do you see something beautiful? I don't know. This is very peculiar. This is intriguing. I'm going to have to sit and think on that one. Let me know what you guys think. But anyway, next story. Well, I was in a coma for a few weeks. It was crap. It was like being in a nightmare. A lot of darkness, voices, flashes of images. No real cohesion or comprehension, but a bad feeling and confusion hung over the consciousness I had. The transition to being awake was similarly disturbing and very difficult for me to distinguish from the comatose state. I needed a lot of feedback about where I was, what was happening, how much time had passed. My family weren't there, so I assumed I was still unconscious. And this was part of the bad dream. It took me almost a week to see a familiar face and put it all together. It took years to come back from that. Mentally, the sense of dark uncanniness stuck with me for a long time. Probably only a year to recover physically, though. Next story. I don't know if this was a brief coma, a stretch of unconsciousness, or they just kept me in some kind of sleep state while I recovered, but I tried to unalive myself 2 years ago with a lethal dose of medication that I was on at the time. Happened on a Friday. My heart rate was at 198 for a few hours. And I was talking the whole time, and they kept pumping sedatives into me, trying to get my heart rate to go down, but it wasn't working at all. They told my dad they were expecting me to go into cardiac arrest at any second. Then blackness? I assumed I fell asleep. When I woke up, was sent to the psych ward and assumed it was only maybe 8 hours later. It was completely disorienting to learn it was Tuesday. It wasn't until the day of my release that they told me I very nearly didn't survive. Spent those days in the ICU. They told my dad not to expect me to wake up. Next story. 3-month coma here. I did know I was in a coma, but had no sense of time. I had some minor awareness of what was going on around me, sort of the inverse of a dream. Speaking of dreaming, I learned lucid dreaming. I remember using Legos to build walls against the pain. I remember alternating between feeling like I was freezing and on fire and used my newfound lucid dreaming powers to try to mitigate those feelings. I remember writing a book in my mind and visualizing it like a movie as I wrote it. I remember feeling the tears of my wife and hearing her cry and talking about how she was running out of strength. I remember wanting to comfort her. I remember wanting to tell her about the book I was working on. Eventually, when I came out of it, the next 6 months were hell. I had no appetite, but somehow gained 40 pounds pretty quickly. It felt like my whole nervous system was off by a millimeter and had to relearn touch typing. I've never recovered the energy I had before. I lost the ability to lucid dream. It'll happen sometimes, but very rarely. I held on to the details of the book in my mind for about 2 days, which wasn't nearly long enough to write it all down, especially since I had to relearn touch typing. There were times in that first 6 months I wished I was back in the coma. And that was 3 years ago, but I only have about 30K of debt left. I'll never be able to buy a house. Due to the debt, I lost my security clearance, which cut off my entire career track. I still feel bad for my family having to go through it, but I think it made us closer. I'm happier with what I have and grateful for the small things in life, which is fortunate because beforehand I was very driven and ambitious. But now I'm more cautious than reserved. Me of 3 years ago wouldn't like me now. He'd think I gave up and should work harder for more tangible success. Current me is happy with the love and the loyalty of my family though. But sometimes though, I miss the ability to create fully fleshed out worlds in my mind. Next story. I was hit by a speeding car back in March of 2005 in front of my high school. Doctors told me that paramedics said I walked on my own into the ambulance. I was told I suffered from TBI, traumatic brain injury, due to a fracture in the base of my skull. Because of the swelling into my brain, doctors had put me into comatose and a hole was drilled into my head where my forehead meets my hairline. I woke up sometime in April and had to relearn how to eat, how to talk, and how to walk. Kind of like someone gave my brain a hard reset. But to answer your question, I remember my entire life before the day of the accident. And I remember waking up from comatose 4-ish weeks later, and I remember nothing else. Next story. Was in a coma for a month from Christmas to the beginning of February 2011 to 2012. I definitely could hear my family talking to me. Not always decipherable, sometimes just murmurs. Definitely felt like I was a ghost. Had an out-of-body experience as well. At least that's what it felt like. I could hear the doctors and the panic when I was bleeding/flatline for a moment. I was in a white room with a window to my right, a figure in the corner, and people always running by the window. I could feel myself wanting to be helped and had woken up, but no one could hear me or help me. Next story. When I died on an operating table of a stroke, it felt relaxing passing. It was confusing and painful dying. Almost euphoric, though, the sensation of literal nothing. No worry, sensation, or concern. But then I remember coming back. The sudden sensation of touches and drowning. I was in a tunnel swimming forward with what seemed like thousands of hands grasping at me. I finally reached an end with what my mind said was the destination. There were two individuals relaxing, one leaning against the air, another lying down on what appeared to be a horizontal wall. Both acknowledged me. The one lying down acted surprised and said something to the effect of, "How in the hell did you get here? You're here way too early." He put his hand on my forehead and pushed back and said, "Back you go." The next thing I remember was waking up on the operating table, screaming incoherently, pulling out my IVs. The staff came running, pinned me down, and then put me into a coma for over a week. The coma might have been the worst part since it felt like my imagination was toying with me for what felt like forever. But that's a whole other story. I was more afraid to fall asleep when I woke up, as there were a few dozen incidents where my mind tricked me into believing I was awake during the coma. So for close to a year afterwards, I would find myself questioning if what I was experiencing was a trick or not. I think what made it worse was that perception-wise, it felt like I was in the coma longer than I was alive, and most of it was stored along with my memories. It took a while for my mind to distinguish what happened wasn't real. Then the individuals relaxing, the one standing looked almost roguish and seemed completely uninterested with my presence. But the one who pushed me had an unremarkable face, looked husky and out of shape. The coma was a bit more scarring, since my imagination, or my mind, kept me shuffling around different scenarios. The majority, all negative, from a quadriplegic scenario in 4D to SA, parental abandonment, water torture, or vivisection. I almost forgot the cathedral with shadow creatures against the wall discussing whether or not to devour me. Next story. At age 18, I didn't think my life was going anywhere, so I took as many pills as I could find and fell asleep in the woods. I thought for sure I had died, but I was found and laid in a coma for 3 days. I remember at one point becoming partially conscious. I knew I had a body. It was laying down, but I couldn't see it or move it. Everything I saw was gray and foggy. I couldn't talk. I was trapped. While in the coma, I actually believed I was in hell, being punished for trying to take my own life. My mom told me, though, that I had the biggest smile when I woke up. I was thankful to be alive. Looking back, I think I may have been seeing some bright lights through my eyelids, but I'm glad it was just a coma either way. If anyone is thinking about taking their own life, get help. I've had depression all my life, and it sucks. But believe me when I say that life is worth it. Please, don't suffer in silence. Next story. I was out into a coma to recover after a bad car accident when I was 15. I didn't know I was in a coma or where I was in general. It all seemed like a dream. I had many out-of-body experiences where I saw myself and people in the room. It was strange. I would be in the dream, but then wake up and do normal things, have conversations with people. It was only after I talked about it I realized I was reliving the couple of days before the car accident. And when I was sleeping, it was me being OOBE. I remember seeing things from the third person. I now dream in third person when I dream myself. Next story. I was put into a coma for 20 days by swerving my car into a random tree on the side of the road because I hallucinated my dad, who was very abusive towards me and my mother, standing in front of it. While in a coma, I was confronted by all of my emotions. They were able to talk to me and I to them. They showed me visions of my past when I was various ages that ranged anywhere from happy and jovial to sad and traumatic. With their help, I was able to sort out what had happened, make peace with those who had wronged me in the past, including my own wife and best friend, as well as the mistakes I had made. I swore I would be a better man if I woke up. This was back in 2004, 2005, and my life has never been better since. Next story. So, I was put into a coma after being thrown headfirst off a bicycle and landing on the road headfirst. Initially, I simply felt like I had a sore head, but over the next 25 minutes, I started to feel drunker and drunker. I was taken to a local surgery where the clerk questioned whether I took drugs due to me playing with the kids' toys in the waiting room and acting in an increasingly juvenile manner. Apparently, what was really happening was a huge amount of bleeding was going inside of my skull, and my brain was shutting down more and more, and my brain functions were trying to protect me. At this time, it hit critical flooding, and I suddenly started to have epileptic shock, something I haven't had prior to this. At this point, I believe I lost consciousness and was admitted to hospital. That evening, I was given a CAT scan by a tired and unfocused worker who managed to totally miss the internal bleeding. As such, I was left overnight with the bleeding continuing, leaving me at risk of my brain being pushed back onto my spinal cord and causing me to either die or be paralyzed from the neck down. Luckily, something with my body managed to dissipate the pressure with external assistance, and I spent the next 2 weeks in a controlled coma. During this time, I remember my mother's voice and a general sense of hospital atmosphere, muffled announcements, the sounds of privacy curtains being pulled to and fro, etc. When I woke up, I was still very confused, but as my father is a doctor, he was able to discharge me into his care. I had very wide double vision for 2 days afterwards. I also had very distorted time perception, feeling that days passed in 10 minutes. I also remember staring at my parents for about 8 hours straight, fascinated and confused by it in equal measure. It was like everything was slightly unknown and required great scrutiny. After a few weeks, I had both my vision and time perception back, and most of my memories. Those closest to the accident took much longer to return, and I finally remembered the moment of flying off the handlebars a full year later, and my futile attempts to get my hands up in front of my head before I hit the deck. It was a crazy experience, but I consider myself very lucky to have had a front row seat to my brain having to almost restart itself and the systems it relies upon. Hope that was interesting for you guys. I was out for two. Next story. I've answered this before, but the answer partly terrifying, partly amusing. I remember feeling trapped in a nightmare world. Think of John Carpenter, but with a Tim Burton aesthetic. In this world, I was being tortured by monsters. This is where I imagine I was initially hooked up to life support and resuscitated. After things got better, I had amazing time in a fantasy world and spent what my brain remembers as about 3 months in an RAF hangar in World War II as a nurse. When I woke up, it turns out my dad had been reading Brandon Sanderson books while I was under, and my now, but not at the time, girlfriend had been RAF during nursing the war. I also asked about my sister's new kitten when I eventually became lucid. This was odd because my sister's housemate when she came to visit me during the coma. After that experience, I told people to be careful what they say about coma patients because how it will affect them. Next story. I have not been in a coma myself, but you can watch Claire Wineland's video about being in a coma. A short summary, she could hear what people were saying, and from what I've gathered, her dreams were also connected to what was happening. She once mentioned dreaming about Alaska, and that they at the time had put ice bags, I think it was, on her feet. She also dreamed about being upside down, and when they changed her bed's position, that's when it happened. She could also talk to the people in her dreams and actually thought she was, but she wasn't in reality. Next story. My mom had a drug overdose. When the paramedics found her, she was 3 days in with very shallow airflow. In the hospital, the doctors had to put her into a medically induced coma. I hardly left her room. 3 weeks in, I sang her a song that she had made up and used to sing to me when I would get sick as a little girl. She would rub my belly and make believe that I had a Buddha belly, singing, "I wish I had a watermelon, I wish I had a watermelon," or even a cantaloupe, and then change the direction of my belly rub It never made sense, but it always made me giggle and it made me feel better. When I did this to her, tears came from her closed eyes. After 5 weeks, she came out of her coma. She had no memory of anything that happened during or before the coma. It didn't matter to me though. I know that during that coma, she could hear me. I have no doubt about it. Then another thing and started making a scene. He was loud and super encounter. Another reason that I am totally convinced. For just about 30 days. Heavily medicated at the time with strong sedatives. Propofol, hydromorphone, oxidone, and fentanyl. Before the coma, I was on these medications for pain from falling 18 feet on a roof and breaking my back in 2011, but the coma, it very much felt like a dream that was either very relaxing or extremely hectic. Filled with anxiety. At one point, I was laying on a bed in what seemed like a very large mansion where the walls doubled as TVs. I could control this simply with my mind, but could not move at all. I only remember snippets of this. Then, for the bad part, at one point in the coma, I had a very high fever and was kept under an ice blanket, which turned my dreaming mindset into chaos. I felt like I couldn't breathe and was fighting to stay alive. At one point, I felt like myself and others were stuck on a sheet on ice in water and being rescued by FNDY. Keep in mind, I had no idea I was in a coma. Woke up at the end of February with no memory loss, only muscle atrophy. Next story. I was put into an induced coma after a severe head injury. It was the single most terrifying experience of my life. The coma itself was simply nothingness. I didn't remember the accident, still don't really. I remember going to bed in my motel room. I woke up in agonizing pain in a dark room tied to a bed. The only man I saw was this creepy towny dude taking me somewhere. I couldn't ask him what happened or where I was because my jaw was wired shut. Not that I understood that at the time. He tried to reassure me everything was okay, but the dude was weird enough that his reassurance only served to cause me to panic even more. He told me I would have to try some of his famous chili that I totally didn't think I was about to become a part of. They stuck me back in a tiny, dark room and I fell asleep or was medicated again. Then I woke up in another tiny, dark room. It felt like a closet. I started crying, screaming my brains out with a wired jaw, absolutely devastated that the last thing I remembered was this effing nightmare. And I was still in it. I was now sure that I had been abducted and they were experimenting on me. It was not as though anyone told me I was in the hospital. All I had seen was something straight out of American Horror Story, and I was suddenly living it. I lived like that for 4 days after they took me out of the coma. I'd given up hope. I was in hell. I would have killed for a single sip of water, but hey, I haven't drank or eaten since I've been there. This must be a dream, right? Then one time, I came to, and it was a little brighter, and my wife was sitting by the bed holding my hand. She'd been 1,000 miles away while I was traveling for work. But what had actually happened